It's my pleasure to introduce the view from the top panel. This is one of the panels at this summit that is always looked forward to, business leaders at the top of their game. New Zealand businesses have shown strong resilience and maintained a strong footprint in the vibrant Chinese market, despite the disruptive effect of the pandemic on international trade. This has helped underpin Kiwi business and, as we've heard this morning, also the fortunes of the New Zealand economy. This high-level business panel will give their readout on where we are and what lies ahead. I'll briefly introduce each panellist and ask them to make some framing up comments. First, Miles Hurrell, appointed CEO of Fonterra in 2018. Miles is focused on resetting the business and has a strong focus on implementing the co-op strategy to deliver sustainable focus. And just highlight that word sustainability, which is very important to Miles. China is an important strategic market for Fonterra. Miles, over to you to tell us how the company's faring.
Good morning, thank you, Fran, and great to be here on this panel this morning, especially as we celebrate 50 years of diplomatic relations between China and New Zealand in December later this year. And also really pleased to see Fonterra as a sponsor of the event this year. It's a welcome opportunity for us to showcase our commitment to and the importance of the China market. Of course, 2 years ago I sat here and talked about our business in China and how we were trying to navigate through COVID-19, and while certainly not behind us, I'm pleased to be able to look more with a forward-looking view. Fonterra entered the Chinese market around 50 years ago also, and it continues to be a strategically important market for us, with about a third of our farmers' milk sold throughout the Chinese market. We have a strong integrated business encompassing consumer brands, food service and ingredients. Our strategy is to meet the Chinese customers and consumers' growing needs for high quality nutrition and provide premium dairy to its people, both online and in store. We do this through our trusted brands, our long-standing relationships with our customers and partners. China is an important part of the global industry supply chain. Innovation, sustainability and efficiency have seen us succeed over the past 40 plus years, and we firmly believe these will underpin our future growth. Despite some softening given the recent COVID-19, we continue to see firm demand for China in the medium to long term. In this financial year, our ingredients business continues to benefit from strong demand and great margins, especially for proteins. We continue to expand our food service footprint across China and now move into second and third tier cities, bringing the total number of cities we operate in to some 417. We're focusing on creating value in China through our focus on innovation, sustainability and, of course, the New Zealand provenance story. Innovation is a common theme of Fonterra's history in China, and we've always been looking ways to use new products in local cuisine. And more recently, we've launched a Cheese Pro, which is a mix of cream and cheese that helps customers save time when making tea macchiatos. In China, we've also continued to demonstrate our ability to enter new products at pace and recently launched Fernleaf fresh milk in the Chinese market in just under 28 days. We've also responded to a growing demand in China for dairy products which support health and wellness post-COVID-19, and last year launched our new probiotic products into the Chinese market with a strain called DR10, and consumers can now use that product on their drinks for added health benefits. And we've also increased our focus on market-led innovation. In 2021, opened our upgraded innovation and application centre in Guangzhou, and we now look to do the same across Beijing, Shanghai, Chengdu and more recently Wuhan. And there's a strong alignment between Fonterra priorities and those of the Chinese government, including targets set around dairy consumption, 300 grams per person per day, and China's emissions reductions targets out to 2060. There are good examples of us working together on addressing these challenges. An example, we were pleased to launch our Carbon Zero butter at the 2021 Chinese International Import Expo, and are working with customers in China to deliver sustainability solutions that contribute to their own carbon reductions objectives. And we'll be again at CIIE later this year to promote sustainability, which will be our 5th participation at that event. In April 2021, our team in China also partnered with the China Environmental Protection Foundation to set up China's first ever project fund specifically designed for the bakery sector. This project offers unique food and beverage industry to help promote and improve sustainability outcomes, including packaging, where Fonterra is leading the way to support over 3,600 online stores. They're just some of the examples we're doing to support China's global sustainability efforts. As we look ahead, the next few years will be continue to strengthen our core business in line with our strategy, which will be continue to grow our food service business by entering more tier 3 to 5 cities, enhancing our products through investment, again in innovation and strengthening our offerings to the Chinese cuisine through continuous menu improvement. Premiumising our consumer business by leveraging our strong brands and responding to emerging trends with a focus again on high-value niche categories. And leveraging our IP to offer new value ingredients, particularly those in the sports and active lifestyles and paediatrics categories, and new functionality targeting health and immunity post-COVID-19. And of course, promoting the goodness of dairy and leveraging the health and wellness trend to meet nutrition benefits of customers. Thank you very much for your time today. Look forward to a good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before I introduce Dan, could those doors across the back be closed? And anybody socialising outside, if they could be asked to go down to the lower lobby, just so to give courtesy to our speakers. If somebody wouldn't mind doing that, that would be really helpful. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure now to introduce Dan Mathieson, who was appointed CEO of Zespri in 2017. Dan's delivered a demand-led strategy in mature markets like China and has been diversifying into new ones from his base in Singapore. And Dan, it's great to welcome you in person to this summit. You have been in before via Zoom, so a pleasure to have you in New Zealand, and thank you for making the time to come.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ni hao. Great to be here with everyone today. I thought I would just reflect on our journey a little bit in the few minutes that I've got just to introduce Zespri, because it reflects, I think, many of the conversations that we heard this morning about learning and understanding each other as we try to find solutions in the way forward. Zespri has been in China now for 20 years, and it's a really important market for us. When I first started at Zespri 20 years ago, I was actually managing quality in China in the early days. I think the market was only 2% of our total sales. Fast forward 20 years and it's now 25% of our total sales, and one of our most highest returning markets, and one that's very, very important for us. As we've heard today, China's got some pretty strong growth challenges ahead of it, but nevertheless there is strong growth there. And even if it doesn't hit its 5.5%, I think we're still looking at about $1 trillion New Zealand dollars in growth. So there is a lot of opportunity there to continue to grow with the China market. But as we've grown in China, we've certainly learnt a lot. We've made a lot of mistakes. And so we've had to learn from those mistakes as we've continued to improve our business footprint and chart a way forward there. In the early days, we tried to manage China from a distance, from New Zealand, from a person in Taiwan, from people flying in from Japan. And we had no real understanding of how that market operated. Fast forward, we now have 100 people in China across all of the critical elements of partnership building in China, and that serves us in very good stead today. We also made a lot of mistakes with partner selections, partners that didn't share the same values or didn't understand our values, and perhaps we didn't understand theirs. So we've spent a lot of time in really trying to choose partners and bring partners to New Zealand and us visit regularly to China to make sure we had this deeper understanding of the partnership and what's needed on both sides for us to win. We've also taken over critical parts of the supply chain. You can't manage China without really understanding how the supply chain works, and in 2016 we became importer of record to ensure that we had greater visibility and transparency on how our product was making it through to market and everything that was involved in getting it there in a compliant and safe way. So we've made real progress there as well. We're also not just a value taker anymore. In the early days, that's what we were doing. We were sending kiwi fruit up there and bringing a lot of value back, but we weren't really investing in helping China be better. And so in the last decade, we've really doubled down our focus on social contribution and trying to work in a sustainable way with our partners in China, and there's a lot more of that to come. We're also pretty excited about the digital platform in China. As we look to double our sales out to 2030, we have a future where 50% of our sales will be sold through to consumers online. It's already 30% when we finish 2022. So that's another very exciting opportunity for us. A lot of those things that I've just mentioned have helped us in recent times when we've faced challenges. We've had COVID found on our fruit just 2 years ago, but it was the deepening of the relationships in China with our partners and with the government agencies that alerted us to that quickly, that gave us the space to respond and minimise disruption to our sales and reputational damage to the brand. So that 20 years of learning and challenge that we've overcome certainly helped us in that regard. Another big challenge for us was also the COVID lockdown in Shanghai, when within 6 weeks we had to divert all of our vessels from the Shanghai port to another port a few hours down the coast. Now, normally that does not happen. There's a lot of process and procedure to go through. But again, the relationships built up over nearly 2 decades helped us move quickly from Shanghai port to Taichung port and successfully import the same amount of kiwi fruit as we would have if we had to go into the Shanghai port. So again, that was built after years of relationships and learning in the China market. And when we now look forward to the challenges ahead of us, sustainability, continuing to grow our market and expand through second, third and fourth tier cities, continue to bring healthy and nutritious kiwi fruit to Chinese consumers. It's these relationships, it's these learnings that are going to help us do that. And we're very, very excited about the future in China. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ray Smith, CEO of the Primary Industries Ministry. Ray leads a team of over 3,500 people across 70 locations in New Zealand and around the world. MPI works to partner with and enable New Zealand's primary sector to become the world's most sustainable provider of high-value food and primary products. He's going to give us a snapshot of what is the total breadth of our market, our agri-market with China. Welcome.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you, Fran, and great to be here. That's a great scene. That's New Zealand. That's what the world sees. And I just wanted to say incredibly well done to every exporter in the room here. I mean, who would have believed after the 2 years we've been through and still coming out through COVID that we would have registered $52.2 billion in export earnings, 9% growth. No one would have seen that we could have achieved that level. Forecast out to $56 billion by the middle of this decade, probably a bit flatter in the year to come, but all looking good on the forward projection. But breaking that down a bit, China are our very important trading partner. 37% of all export receipts come through our China market. And you can see the sort of relative settings there with others, USA in at 10, Australia at 8, down through. There's quite a big grouping at the bottom there, you might be saying, but that's 80% or above the 21% at the bottom line there, which is picking up across the 120 countries that New Zealand exports to. But in this last year, China market grew by 16%, South Korea 21%, so nearly 40-50% out through the Asian market altogether. If you sort of take a further look inside that, what sits inside it, 57% of all our forestry earnings come through export through China, 41% of dairy, 37% for red meat and wool, 36% in seafood, and around 14% in horticulture. So our China market is growing, and it's incredibly important to us. You can see it a little bit deeper there across all those categories if you look back to 2008, to the beginning of the free trade agreement. And while you can see dairy's in the yellow, there was that bit of a spike, Miles, you might remember in 13, 14, but there's a growth path there. I haven't even plotted the 22 numbers on here because they just get higher again, so just imagine that extrapolating through a bit further. But you see dairy in the yellow, forestry in the green, and meat in the blue. But all sectors have grown, but our big sectors have grown the most. Seafood's been a bit bruised in the last period. It's been really tough for them through COVID, so any of the big seafood companies in New Zealand, just want to acknowledge that while we're here together. It's been tough for them, and it's tough for them now with fuel prices, where you're going from somewhere around about 1/3 to 2/3 of your costs being lost in fuel prices. So it's very hard, and with the close down of food service for seafood sector, it was very difficult. But you can see that growth over time, and I just want to shout out also to those that are not in the big groupings that I mentioned there. Rock lobster at 365 million. Things like tripe, 10 years ago, $100,000 of tripe to China, today 100 million. So we're finding value in a whole range of ways. Cherries at 100 million. Honey continues to grow. Dan, as you see, kiwi fruit up to 24% now of your product. And pet food at 100 million as well. So there's the big categories, and then there's a whole range of other value-added products into the China market. The FTA with China over time compared to all other FTAs gives you another view into the world and just how that's grown and grown rapidly over time, and how incredibly important the China market is to us. So from where I'm sitting, our export revenue receipts from China are great. There's been a bit of a spike on the commodity prices and demand, which have driven it up. We'll see that flatten a little bit, but we can expect this growth out in the following years. And what underpins that growth is incredibly important as well. So of course it's every business in the room that does their business in China, but this architecture that we have put together between us, the dialogue, it's been talked about a bit this morning by the Minister and others. Ambassador, I think you referenced it as well. And if you think about the relationship we have with those 4 key agencies, my recent Minister Shane Jones will tell you he's been an advocate in the Forestry and Grassland Administration meetings. So ministers have a series of bilateral meetings that are on either on an annual or biannual basis. I mean, that's quite unique in terms of the way that that's structured. They're also structured at my level and down through with my key officials, and then at the working level, you can see the sort of vast array of programs there, some of which are being mentioned today, whether it's around dairy or fisheries or forestry or milk quality, or our agricultural growth partnership, where we're looking for opportunities together to benefit both economies. And so those dialogues are incredibly important, and they give a sense of each other and our systems and a confidence that allows us to do more. So New Zealand, along with the Netherlands, are the only 2 countries that can undertake audits for infant formula on behalf of China. So those important assessments are able to be made here in New Zealand. That's because of the confidence we have built over time through the dialogue that underpins this free trade agreement. And I just wanted to finish quickly on my Deputy Director General, who's based in China, Charlotte Austin. Bit of a mission for her to get there. She went there just as Shanghai was entering its difficult period with COVID. So she had 3 weeks quarantine in Shanghai, followed by 2 weeks quarantine in Beijing. But after 35 days, she was delighted to get to day 1 at work. You need to know her because she's committed. She's there for you. She's there for everybody in the agricultural community. I mean, the sort of broad primary sector is 82% of merchandisable exports to China. It underpins, sort of 12% of our GDP. It's 365,000 people got up and went to work this morning in the primary sector, and nearly 40% of what they produce is consumed in China. That's the nature of it. We're a major, 92% of all the food we produce is exported. So this team in China, it's not just Charlotte, she's got a team of 5 or 6 people there, plus a team back here. They have been incredibly busy through the last 2 years. So those logistical concerns, whether it's helping Dan or his team, or Miles or his team, people in the meat industry or right across the board, I think they played an incredible role, and I think it shows our commitment to the relationship that we've got those people there. Even when everyone was coming back at the beginning in March 2020, when everyone was sort of coming back to New Zealand and flooding back out of these places, Tim Knox, who went earlier than Charlotte as the Deputy Director General there, went the other way. And actually, he never managed to get there with his partner, so he spent nearly 3 years over there on his own trying to make this work. So look, we're very committed to the relationship, and I'm going to finish, Dan, just so you don't box me around the ears. We started with cows, but kiwi fruit have been an incredible success story in China. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ray, and what phenomenal figures they are, really, and a real tribute to the sector through quite difficult times. And I think all of us in the room acknowledge that. Our final panellist is Nicola Shadbolt, a professor at Massey University in Agribusiness and Farm Management. She's also worn a number of hats over the years, director at Fonterra, various chairmanships, and a climate change commissioner. She has an exceptional worldview on agri, so I invite you to share it.
Thank you very much, Fran. I'll just get this to my height. My sons tell me I'm vertically challenged, so I was going to get this right. Okay, there are three key themes that I'd like to cover just in the short time I'm going to speak. One is the global food map and trade. The other is food security. And then I want to end on a really positive note around reciprocity. So in terms of the global food map, I think one of the things that I find concerning is when I hear sort of fairly senior officials say things like, well, New Zealand doesn't really feed the world, or we only feed the rich and it really doesn't matter if, they can always get their food from somewhere else. And you think, gosh, there's a real lack of understanding in terms of what the global food map really looks like. And so if we think of this map as a series of interconnected balancing of various supply and demand dynamics, we've got a lot going on that New Zealand plays a part in differently, but as I say, there's supply and demand dynamics in there. And then coupled with that, we've got product that in many cases is highly perishable. So if you've got a product that's very perishable, tends to be those markets are very thinly traded because you tend to eat them where they're produced, makes sense. Where they're traded is a very small percentage of what the world supply actually is. So in that interconnected balance, you've got countries that have, as in New Zealand, a comparative advantage, as we were told by one of the earlier speakers, in food production, and then those where self-sufficiency is not possible. And there's always, historically, New Zealand has always filled that gap. We've enabled food to be available for those who are not self-sufficient because we have that comparative advantage. And yes, we can call it a competitive advantage as well, but to be honest, it's not about competition so much now, it's actually about feeding the world. And so if I go back to the sort of the SDGs that sit there as our sort of guide of how we should be delivering to the world, these things really matter. So one of the key decision makers in this map, and actually are down at the farm, and maybe also influenced by legislation and other things there, but that person with that block of land has to decide, do I grow food? Do I grow feed? Do I grow fibre? Or more recently, do I grow fuel? And whichever decision is made at that level will influence that whole global map and our ability to actually feed the world. So if you think 3 decades ago, there were about 2 billion people that lived in absolute poverty. By 2018, that figure had more than halved, and China played a huge role in that reduction, which is fantastic for humanity, for our world, but it also increased the demand for food, because as people become wealthier, they eat better. So they should. And then also, as you get more people into the middle class, you get that stronger demand for even higher value food. So that inexorable increase in demand is inexorable. Has continued. Yes, it has some ups and downs, but generally that's been a very steady trend. So dairy is a great example of that. 2% is the increase in demand in dairy every year and has been for some time. In fact, in China, recent research shows that's been a 3.1% increase. So that increase every year, 2% increase in the world supply is a whole New Zealand every year. So it gives you an indication of just how great that demand is. So then we look at supply, and in my experience over the years, supply is the one that has the biggest impact on prices. Because whether it's disease, whether it's foot and mouth, whether it's swine fever, avian, PSA, you name it, there's things that will impact on that supply. And because the demand is inexorable, if supply has hiccups, then immediately that gets impacted into pricing. Climate can also play a role, floods, droughts, you name it, and that's just the reality. I always laugh when people say to me, we really need to explain to farmers, about climate. And I said, gosh, every day we wake up and pull curtains back and the first thing we think about is what's the weather like today? And then the constant changing and adapting your systems to still deliver food despite all of those challenges. And then lastly, the other supply one is around this whole geopolitical area. So whether it be war, which Ukraine impact is very real right now, whether it's increased protectionism, whether it's people deciding, no, we won't export. I mean, very briefly, Indonesia didn't export palm oil for a little while and backed off from that. But each time as countries put in that political influence, again, that can have an impact on that supply and therefore on price. Huge fragility in these markets and massive volatility as a result. So where does New Zealand play a role in this? Well, yes, I've mentioned before, we do feed the world in many instances. A third of world trade, given that only 9% crosses borders, but a third of that is dairy, of the dairy trade, about the third of the sheep meat trade, and I have it on good authority, well over half, the majority of kiwi fruit world trade comes from New Zealand. So we play a part in filling those supply gaps. The world is at its most precarious place right now, though, in terms of food security, the most precarious I've seen in many years. There's three things really sort of playing out in that area. One is the cost of production. So it's actually now costing even more to produce that food, whether it be the cost of fertilizer, the cost of labor, and just that in itself is ratcheting things up and causing more problems in terms of food security. Availability is the other, whether it be the geopolitical issues I mentioned before, whether it be climate. If the food isn't there, then again, that price goes up. And lastly is affordability. So as the increase in prices come through, yes, we have people coming out of extreme poverty, but what can they now afford, given the way the prices are actually moving? So I want to end on a really positive note, and that's around reciprocity. Because I believe that for us to deliver a secure, stable supply of safe nutrients, New Zealand, to the world and particularly to China, as we know, and a large percentage of our product goes through to China, it actually has to be complementary to domestic production. And also there has to be a technology increase to enable that food supply to address whether it be labor, environmental impact, whatever else it is, there's science and technology required to really start to address some of those supply issues. I believe it's not an either or, it's an and there's a really key area here we can be complementary, but mutual benefit. And one of the areas that really stands out for me is in the one of science and innovation. We have already high-quality relationships in science, high-quality relationships in business, as was being explained before, and out of those we can develop genuine reciprocity moving into the future to address some of these supply concerns and to provide those meaningful connections that New Zealand and China do so well. Thank you.
Sure you're all looked after. So we've heard this morning, obviously there's some pressure on the China market and ageing society and so forth, but against that, the point made by the ambassador that we're seeing the movement of some 800 million people to a new level of sustainability or middle-class sustainability in China. Given the competition that we've also heard about, how confident are you in the China market, and what will you be doing also to, message against, into an environment where there's much more focus on sustainability, product provenance, all of that? And I'll start with you on that one, Miles. So I'm losing my voice.
we're in a fantastic position here. The farming systems that we operate, not just from a dairy perspective, but the farming systems we operate generally, put us in a really strong position from a sustainability perspective. And even the questions that are coming through here around our reliance on China against other markets, it's because the Chinese consumers value what we produce here in New Zealand and the way we produce it, the way we care for our animals, the way we care for our land, and the Chinese consumers are prepared to pay for that. So it's not a case of too much in China's category. It's the question we put to our other markets, that why aren't you valuing what the Chinese consumers do, because they're prepared to pay for it. But we can't be complacent in that regard as well. That's great from I think an overall perspective around how the Chinese consumers see our products, but we now need to adapt our products to be more fit for purpose for that market, and we're seeing that in our case in particular around the emergence of products for wellness on the back of COVID in particular, and making sure that we can continue to adapt accordingly.
How important is the carbon footprint?
I think it's becoming more important, and I think that the Chinese government have made their own stand to be peaking in 2030 and net zero by 2060. So a little bit behind, I guess, where some of the other rest of the world are. So if there's an opportunity for the Chinese market to get a head start, I think it's in food consumption by dealing with countries like New Zealand.
Dan, you're interested in partnership opportunities as well, and clearly there have been issues within the Chinese market for Zespri. How have you approached those, and how do you, what, I guess, lessons have you got for moving forward?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing to what Miles said, because I thought it was a good one. Just to add that what we are seeing, so we do have a very strong position. We've got healthy, nutritious foods that China wants, and we want to supply them there. We have seen, though, in recent times, an absolute strengthening of the sentiment to buy local, because they're wanting to support their local production, their local producers to do better. And I think that's something, as New Zealand producers, we also have to think about. How can we contribute to that? Nicola mentioned it. How can we actually contribute to that so that we have sustainable food production out of New Zealand to supply consumers from the Southern Hemisphere, but also that we're supporting China to supply their domestic market in the season that makes sense for them. So I think that's something that we need to consider, and it's going to be a challenge for the future, depending on the product that you have. When it comes to partnerships, what we've learned, I think we were quite nervous about engaging with Chinese officials and partners for a long time, didn't quite understand each other, and therefore sort of tiptoed round issues. I think what we've experienced in recent times is we've built a much stronger workforce in China, is that actually what we want to have is the upfront conversations, and that's served us in really good stead. If you've got challenges, we need to put them on the table. If the challenges are on the table, you won't always find an immediate solution, but at least you go away from that meeting with everyone thinking about the same challenges and trying to find solutions. So I think that's been a real learning for us in the last 5 years, as we've built much stronger relationships with our government agency partners. And I mentioned those two examples of COVID fines on packaging, us having to move ports. Well, that happened through very upfront conversations. Big challenges on the table. We didn't have solutions right away, but both sides went away and thought about it, and we actually found a solution. We're able to move forward.
Some of this, Ray, due to the confidence that's been built up since 2008 and the institutional arrangements around the FTA.
Absolutely, and I couldn't underscore that enough to say, if an exporter gets on the phone to us, we have very trusted relationships with our colleagues in China. To be able to pick up the phone, for people to be able to get meetings, to be able to discuss and find a solution. I think that's been, over the last 24 months, that's absolutely been our experience. There have been very few occasions when we haven't been able to resolve an issue that's materialised, or particularly, there were a range of times, I think, when COVID appeared on packaging, for instance, and we just needed to work that through, and we worked that through very carefully with Chinese officials through all of those avenues that we have, and that's been very supportive. Look, I think even some of the in-country audits that were done, China officials undertook video audits in New Zealand for the first time in order to we could provide the assurances, both in the kiwi fruit and apple industries, and I think there were others as well. And through all of that, I think there's been a great appreciation of our openness, our ability to share information, and to be able to kind of help each country understand what the needs were, and then New Zealand exporters have gone out of their way to make sure that they could meet those needs. And I think that kind of assurance on food safety systems has been highly valued by China, and is something that New Zealand's proven to be very good at.
I mean, what's your insight on that, Nicola? I mean, how hard was it for New Zealand and China to get to this amazing new understanding, I guess?
I think it took time. It took commitment. When I think of some of the people that I've met working up in China, probably putting my Fonterra hat on, was the absolute dedication of those staff to really try and get on top of what is the difference in culture, to Dan's point, understanding and really building those relationships, because those relationships, whether they be in industry or in science, are enduring once the trust is built. It just takes time.
I'm going to take a few questions from the floor, and then I'll come back to this. A question from Penny Tucker: is the government doing enough to negate some of the misleading international narratives, re the footprint, integrity and efficiency of New Zealand as a food producer? Who'd like to give this a go first? Ray, all right.
I think they're looking at the government. Look, a huge amount. I mean, we are on the brink of putting in place an agricultural pricing mechanism for emissions. We're the only country in the world doing that. All of our colleagues in the rest of the world are looking back at us and saying, we want to see how you do that. And I don't know if you've seen the dialogue coming out of Ireland in the last sort of few days, but you'll notice they've set a 25% goal by 2030. It's easy to set goals in some sense, but what's the plan to get there? We've actually got a plan. We've got a plan through Hawaka Kanoa, which will deliver an agricultural pricing mechanism. We've also got another thing that we're doing around building sustainability around the joint venture that a number of the private sector companies, Fonterra is part of it, Silver Fern's part of it, Ravensdown's part of it, LIC's part of it, Ngaitahu Holdings are part of it, and Synlait are part of it. Those 6 companies, together with MPI on behalf of government, are trying to build a joint venture fund that will probably rise to about $100 million per annum over the next, to run that out for the next decade, to get on top of this methane and nitrous oxide issue. So our objective in working together as government and industry is to be the first in the world to extend our comparative and competitive advantage. So that's been talked about. We've got that advantage, but we can extend the runway if we can be first to get there and cut that emissions profile, and then we'll have the IP as well to take to the rest of the world. So, I would say, in terms of sustainability credentials, we start in a really good place, and I think we will show huge leadership in this area.
Okay. I'll just put a question here to... Oh, it's disappeared off. It was one for Miles. Okay. I've got a question from Micah Rand, which says, how important do you think it is for New Zealand companies, especially SMEs, to collaborate and thrive in such an intensely competitive market? And if I could put that to you first, Nicola.
Yeah, I think this is where obviously events like this become useful, because, not everybody's a Fonterra. And yes, we do have entrepreneurs who have great ideas, develop amazing products, and need to be able to get to market. So to be able to actually make that link through and have the system set up, know that MPI have got their back covered for those sort of export constraints that might be there, and to make sure that they've got all the paperwork, make sure that they've got the various players through the market that they can link to is critical.
If I can just add on that as well, I think it's absolutely mission critical that the collaboration happens across all companies, big and small, across New Zealand, particularly in this area of sustainability. So Ray just talked about everything that the government is doing, and now private enterprise have to follow the lead. We have to be able to actually not just tell our stories anymore, because we're all pretty good at telling how we are good for the world, but who's actually delivering. And that's the next step for us. And we can't do that by ourselves. We actually have to do it as a collective group of private entities if we're going to have a big enough impact to turn the dial, I believe.
Question here for Miles. Fonterra from Jerry Clode have developed Anmum and Anlean brands alongside food service for China. Where's the future of Fonterra branding for China?
Yeah, well, we're excited about the future for China from a consumer perspective, but I think understanding the market first and foremost. So Anlean and Anmum, for those that aren't familiar, are a powdered-based product that have been successful for us over a number of years. But predominantly the consumer in China will use liquid products. So whether it be liquid milk for everyday consumption, but yogurt category in particular is a very important market. So from New Zealand being the distance that we are, yogurts from New Zealand into the Chinese market is going to be a very small part of the business. It needs to be produced locally. So we still have a strong future in our consumer business. Anchor Butter is the number one butter brand in the Chinese market. But it's about working with those large consumer brands in China that are close to the consumer and supplying them key ingredients for their products. But it's an and for us.
A question here to Ray. Is there any concern from the government and MPI about the level of reliance upon the Chinese market for our various agri-exports?
I think the first thing is to put that into context. I mean, we along with say Australia, Brazil, say Chile, Thailand, Japan, also share China as the largest market. So New Zealand's not out there on its own. 20% of the world's population roughly live in China, and that population has high disposable income relative to the rest of the world. And so I think it's quite natural that a country that exports 92 to 93% of everything that it produces in food and fibre is going to find a trading partner that is willing to buy that product. So I think I'd set it in that context. I think the other thing I'd say is, quite a bit was talked about resilience this morning, and if you think back to that chart I was showing that showed China at 37%, and then if you went down to the UK at 2%, we've got as we celebrate 50 years here of relationship with China and all that it's brought for the two countries, 50 years ago our relationship with the UK kind of ended, right? When they joined the ECC. And so 50 years later, we've got a free trade agreement, which is very similar to the agreement we've got with Australia in a sense, where we can actually begin to diversify a bit, and we can actually begin to build in another market and build out that resilience that I think both Minister O'Connor and the Prime Minister referenced earlier in the day. So I think New Zealand's got other options, but I think the bigger context is China's got a very big population with a very high disposable income, and we have a product that's looking for a market, and I think we will see more resilience built in over time.
Yeah, it was interesting. The ambassador this morning talked about this national asset, I guess, which has been built up in the brand over many years of quiet shepherding on either side, and with a few hiccups along the way, some of them quite marked. And I do recall the famous milk run up to China at that time with John Key, Sir John Key back in the day. But what's your own view on how do we protect and harness that brand that has been built up, that national asset, if you like, in the relationship?
Yeah, well, it's like I think brand in any market that you operate in, it takes a long time to build and establish, but it can disappear very quickly if you have an own goal. And I think that's why it comes back to the food safety quality, certainly in our perspective, and the partnerships that Ray and his team have built up in the Chinese market. That's critical, because as soon as you lose that trust of not just the Chinese consumer but also the Chinese government, that we have a long road back. So I think continue to focus on that, build your strong brands, intergenerational brands, making sure that you don't have a short-term view. And also, getting the right partners, I think, is also important in that context.
Yeah.
Just adding to that, I think, and there's some great work being done actually by David Downs, the New Zealand story. I think there's a real opportunity there for us all to have a consistent story when we go into China and when we're talking with our partners right across the value chain. So I think that also can add value.
Just on that partnership, Natasha Hamilton-Hart has asked, how should New Zealand firms learn to select the right in-market partners in China? And I guess I could throw this one to you, Nicola, to start.
I guess one of, just going back to Dan's point before, in terms of developing or maintaining the brand, he gave an example of how there was a situation and nobody knew the answers, but they sat down together and resolved them. And I think it's actually finding someone who is comfortable to do that with you, and then you end up with a solution that you both have bought into. And so in terms of finding the right fit for partners, yes, there can be times when it's not, in retrospect, but at the time it's aligning the different parties' requirements and seeing if there is that sort of mutual benefit, and really that's that reciprocity that I talked about before.
Just one example in our sector, but it is hard partner selection. It's often hard to go through the superficial understanding of who that partner is that you're wanting to work with. The best way that we've found, and we've had, is obviously to be talking with other key exporters that are going in that may be using the same partners. And we've had a lot of other suppliers of fresh produce in our sector coming to us and saying, which partners should we work with? And we want to share that. We want to say who are the good ones and who are the ones that we've had trouble with or challenges with in the past. And so I think that's true in every sector. Make sure you're cross-referencing what you're hearing from a whole lot of different points of view before you make that final decision, and hopefully that'll give you a better chance of success.
A question from Grace Taylor. What's your view around the change in low consumer confidence globally, and that's the loss of confidence? And the younger generation of consumer in China is moving towards supporting local produce, that localisation sense. How do you view this? How do you view the trend? Do you think it will become an issue, or do you think it's simply that the sheer growth there means it's not really going to be so?
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit of both. I mean, the market has grown at such a rate, and I think Nicola referred to the point that, you know, the demand globally in the dairy context grows by another New Zealand every year. So that puts us in a really great position to be a bit more selective around who we do or don't go after. So while you see some trends that are going the opposite direction, such as the way the consumer, the younger consumer in particular, are operating, it doesn't concern us at this point in time. The way they are supporting a locally made Chinese product is something that I take my hat off to in terms of the way that the Chinese government have developed that. I mean, who would have thought, 15, 20 years ago that the Chinese consumer would go for a local product over international brands? And that's something I think that the Chinese government have done a superb job building their own confidence around their own food safety and quality systems in particular, which were, you could argue, substandard going back a couple of decades. So they've done a great job. But again, from a personal perspective, having the relationships with those key players from an ingredients perspective allows us to be party to both.
And maybe just to build on that, I mean, and we face it a lot within the kiwifruit industry. People are very nervous about, for example, obviously our IP's been taken there, and there's a spread of our Sun Gold variety, and people are very nervous about that, and we're concerned about it, and we want to see IP protection in place so that it can encourage more innovation coming into the horticultural sector. I would say, though, that it's a massive market. It's a huge market, and so there is other ways, even with a stronger domestic supply of kiwifruit in our case, to differentiate yourself and actually to coexist in a win-win outcome. So actually we want to continue to have a strong brand and resonate with Chinese consumers in China. We also want, for the overall growth of the category, to have strong domestic production in China of a good quality level that consumers love and want to pay more for, because that helps bring up the overall category. So I think there is opportunities to look at it as a win-win when we start to think about globalisation or buy local. There are opportunities to compete and be successful there.
Could I just add a comment there as well? I think sometimes the buy local can get misconstrued, because we are, as I mentioned earlier, we are only a very small percentage of the world's total production. We happen to be a high percentage of what's traded. But that means that there's a lot that's already grown locally, that's consumed locally. So China actually has a significant dairy herd, for example. And so, yes, to buy local is a movement amongst some. It's an and or. It's an and, not an either or. So support of that, you don't tell the consumer they're wrong. You absolutely ensure that they can buy local, but then connecting with the science to ensure that that local is safe and meets all the criteria that they have learnt to expect from internationally imported product is a win-win for everybody.
Got a question from Frankie Wong. Dear panellists, the China and approach has become quite popular lately. What lessons have we learnt from trading with China that would benefit us in other markets? It's actually a good question.
It is a good question, but I think it's probably been covered a little bit already around making sure you choose the right partners, set a strategy that you can be confident in, but be prepared to be agile at the same time. Again, from a dairy perspective, we still are in a situation where less than 14% of our business that we operate in is a duties at less than 10%. So we talk about China but the pressure in my mind goes back to the New Zealand government to support industry with free trade agreements that can be operable, and really pleasing to see the United Kingdom, but still a bit of work to do in other areas. So the China is helpful at the high level, but at the same time, when you've got consumers that are prepared to pay for what we produce here in New Zealand and China, it's very much a China with a small land at this point.
And just adding to, I think one of the things I talked about in the opening was the digital platform. So there is an enormous opportunity to learn from how we sell to consumers in China and take that into other markets for acceleration of the development there. A really good example is now the UK market, which has now obviously given us a slightly more open door through the FTA, which is fantastic. They're actually in Europe, or that whole European region, the most digitally connected. But that's actually still a small amount of fruit or products that are sold online through to consumers. So there's a lot of learnings that we can take from China to implement there in the UK space for a better access through to consumers.
Just another side to that, and it is, do you expect your export share to the China market to continue to grow then?
From our perspective, probably not. I think when we're in a situation where we see, as I say, stable milk or even declining milk in a New Zealand context, and the global market continue to grow, and more markets understanding what we produce and the provenance story that goes with it. So the contagion effect of what we've seen with Chinese consumers starting to flow through, and only last week was in South Korea, and that is probably one of our fastest growing markets at the moment, off a smaller base, I might add. But I think the rest of the world is starting to recognise the importance of what we produce. So, I wouldn't see our Chinese supply to China increasing, but I don't see it falling away anytime soon either.
More questions? This is from Mike Underhill. Any advice from Dan and Miles for commodity exporters who are considering creating B2C brands in China? Top 3 do's and don'ts.
I'll go with the do's.
No pressure.
Which will be well, look, I think the 3 from my perspective that we've learned is you've got to get the right people on the ground. That's the people that can really give you the insight and the understanding of how the market works, and that flows through to both your own staff, your own people on the ground, but also the partners. So we've talked quite a bit about that. I think also we made the mistakes early on of going too far and wide. We weren't concentrated enough. We spread our product everywhere. We didn't have enough investment to back it up. So start small. Huge opportunity, but you don't need to boil the ocean in China. You can choose selected markets or even retailers. Start small and really focus. And I think the other one is just be really clear on your story. And it's not just a product story anymore. You must be clear on what your purpose is, how you are going to do good for China, and that needs to be built into how you communicate with consumers.
The only other point I'd add is to be prepared to be agile and nimble. I mean, the Chinese market moves so fast, and to spend months coming up with a plan and a strategy and an in-market, go-to-market strategy, by the time you get your product on the shelf, there's a pretty good chance that the market's moved on. And so be prepared to be agile, which is why, coming back to the earlier comment around choosing your right partner, I think is critical. That can be eyes and ears on the ground if you're not fortunate enough to have your own people.
A question for you, Ray. What value do the Maori economy and iwi-produced exports add to our relationship with China, and what are the government private sector doing to promote these?
Yes, I was thinking about that. I was wondering, I think we're probably only at the beginning of truly seeing the value in our unique cultural identity in terms of expressing that internationally. So there's a uniqueness to who we are as New Zealanders that only we can be, that only we have because of our bicultural relationship and our foundations. And when that is expressed through the care that we have for the food and product that we produce in New Zealand and take into the world, there is a value proposition in there that I don't think we're capitalising on yet. You see it in bits and pieces, but I don't think we've quite worked out how to bring that together as a proposition in total for New Zealand exporters, and particularly for Māori exporters. So, I mean, I know NZTE have done a lot of work in this space as well, in helping particularly Māori exporters go to market. But there's a bigger thing in there about this identity that we have, and the cultural identity that shows a care for planet and things that I think we could take to market. It's just kind of how to bring that together into a sort of more saleable proposition.
Possibly the final question. With COVID disruption to people flows and the labour market, what's your business strategy to manage China's business exposure through a long distance? Perhaps starting with you.
Yeah, so a couple of things from our perspective. Firstly, owning the supply chain. I think, Dan, you made a similar call, but we own the supply chain, and again, in partnership with Silver Fern Farms. We felt it was the only way to have confidence in getting products to market. And the other one, quite frankly, is just to have a deeper pockets, carrying a bit more working capital to suffer the buffer that we're experiencing globally. So that's it's not pleasant. Certainly with interest rates increasing, it's a significant cost to any business. But I see that's a short-term measure that carrying a bit more inventory is not a bad thing at times like this.
Yeah, and we've done exactly the same. I'd echo the same comments. You need to get to China, I think, is also the answer. I mean, yes, it's hard. I've been to China in the last 2 years through COVID, doing the quarantine. Ambassador talked about it as the first of the 3 words today, commitment. You won't be successful in China if you're not prepared to get there and understand it.
That question also had, I guess, something for the smaller exporters and smaller businesses, and NZTE is clearly very supportive there. But what about MPI?
Yeah, I mean, I think. Sorry, I was distracted by the questions about foot and mouth.
That's the last one.
Yeah.
That one is for you.
Yeah. Which I'm really.
That's coming for you in a minute.
Happy to deal with that.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Fran, I wasn't paying attention.
No, that was coming. Well, forget that question. Do you have a plan for if foot and mouth disease reaches New Zealand? Ray.
No, we do. And you'll be pleased to know, and it's on our website. It's been there for 3 years. No, look, it's serious, right? Yeah. So it's a good opportunity just to talk about that. So thanks for that, for raising that. First thing I just want people to know is, when you come into New Zealand and you come through, it's the bit of the biosecurity system most people see. It's not the only part, but it's a bit that's most visible. When you come into New Zealand, one of the slowest parts about getting out of the airport is getting out through my biosecurity people right at the end. Just when you've had enough and you thought you were away, and then someone says, stop, what have you got? Have you got any food? Have you got any products? We're going to x-ray you, and so on, right? So we've had that system in place. So our system is built to keep FMD out, right? Because FMD is in a whole range of countries we already trade with. And it has been around the world. So first thing, and you contrast that with when you go into Australia, who have very similar biosecurity principles as we do, but you don't end up in that queue, do you? Where you get your bag checked and all of that kind of stuff. That hasn't been the kind of routine, although they are moving to be more like us. So first thing is we're built to try and keep it out. Our import health standards are built to keep it out. Products that come to New Zealand from different countries have to be treated in different ways, or they can't come at all. And we audit those things. So there's this massive thing that's built in behind to try and keep it out. But that doesn't mean things always stay out, does it? They can get in. If you go to the airport at the moment, we changed it while we're in the middle of COVID. There are no fast lanes now, sorry folks, and they're not coming back. Well, I'm not going to bring them back. So everything gets x-rayed. That's our best mechanism, right? Our best mechanism is every bag goes through the x-ray, and we can see if someone's got a food product they shouldn't have. We also cut down the number of food products people can bring, and the volume they can bring to make it a bit more manageable for our people. So at the moment, with passenger numbers about half what they normally are, that's okay. It's going to get a bit harder, and we're going to have to work on just how we get those flows moving. Second thing is, if you're coming out of Indonesia, then you're going to get asked a whole lot more questions, and you're going to get the foot rub bath thing to go through. We'll check your bag, and I've got some fairly good feedback that that's all happening. We want to kind of check people's shoes and so on. And by the way, if you're coming back through Bali or Indonesia to New Zealand, you'll be coming through Australia, so you get it done there and you'll get redone over here. So we think we've got that reasonably well aligned. But the bigger thing is, what if it does get into New Zealand? And if I can just touch on that, because it's a scary thought. It's a gigantic thing if we end up with that. So what we've done is we've built a lot of capability. And one of the capabilities we built is off the back of managing Mycoplasma bovis. So for the last 5 years, we've been managing the largest biosecurity incursion in New Zealand in a cattle disease. We've culled animals off 279 farms. We've got a bit to go. We aren't quite there yet, but we're down to the last couple. We've done an incredible job. With that, we have built a workforce and a capability in disease management and tracing and casing. We built a new laboratory in Wallaceville, in Wellington, that can do 7,000 tests a day. It was built to cope with the foot and mouth outbreak. So we built capability, and actually the thing I've learnt is that responding to a big biosecurity incursion, one of the things you really need is people that have been there before. So you can write as many plans as you like, but if you've never done one, then you're going to really struggle. So we've got disease management experts running the Mycoplasma bovis program that came from the UK that ran the foot and mouth program. So look, we built a bit of muscle. It's still not going to be easy if it comes in. And if it does arrive, and we find it on a farm or farms, we'll circle those farms, we'll stop. For the first 72 hours, no one will be able to move an animal in New Zealand. And every farmer will be sent out with their rural consultant or veterinary professional to go and check their animals and make sure they haven't got it. Because the best way to find out is through visual inspection. And then we will narrow down the circles, sort of 10k radiuses around the farms that we find, and we'll stop all movement there, and then we'll have to cull and disinfect. And that'll be ghastly, but that's how we will close it down and then get the rest of the economy moving. The big challenges will become on the trade-related front. Because we have a massive trade advantage because we don't have foot and mouth disease. And so what we've got to do is prove we can manage it really quickly, get it under control. That first 72 hours is critical. And then what you see in countries where it gets away, and that's of course the case in Indonesia at the moment, they're only just starting to get on top of it. So 2 months have gone by. And so it's going to be a real challenge for them. They're in a whole different place than we are. So look, just to give you a bit of a sense of it, we're working really hard to make sure that we keep it out. If it comes, we can respond. And all of our partners here, a number in this room, are working with us. I'll give a shout out. Ravensdown just said, look, if we get a problem, you can have our 300 people. We'll go fight it. And actually, that's what we're going to need. Because if we all step forward, we'll take care of it reasonably quickly. But it won't be without a cost.
On that happy note. Look, let me look at the positive. It's great to see how well prepared you are, Ray. And this is obviously a threat. The government has said so. But however, there has been, as you said, that muscle built from dealing with other incursions. So thank you for the panel. Let's hope things go very well, and wish you all good luck in the China market. And thank you also for your views. Yeah, thank you.